The woman on the bench was quietly falling apart in the middle of Union Station, and no one seemed to notice. Or maybe they noticed, but no one cared enough to stop. Except for a 5-year-old girl clutching her last $5. Money meant for a book, not a stranger. A crumpled bill, a crying stranger, and a little girl who had no idea that this tiny act of kindness would set off a chain of events that would change 3 lives forever. What followed would reveal a secret worth billions and prove that sometimes the smallest hands carry the greatest power. Before we dive in, tell us, where are you watching from? We love seeing how far these stories travel. It was late afternoon at Union Station in Chicago, the station alive with the clatter of rolling suitcases, the murmur of voices, and the constant rhythm of trains arriving and departing. A little girl, no more than 5, tugged at her father's hand, pausing mid-step to stare at a woman sitting alone on the bench. The woman's shoulders shook ever so slightly, and her head bowed low as if she were trying to disappear beneath the weight of the crowd rushing past. Most people ignored her, weaving around her without a glance. Lily Mercer tilted her head and whispered, "Daddy, she's crying." David Mercer, her father, tightened his grip on her small hand. "Honey, let's not bother her. People sometimes like to be alone," he said gently, trying to steer her forward. But Lily was insistent. Her little feet carried her toward the bench before David could react, stopping just in front of the woman. "Hi," she said, her voice soft but clear. "Are you sad?" The woman looked up, startled. Her eyes were red-rimmed, tear streaks still wet on her cheeks. I guess I am," she admitted, her voice barely a whisper. Lily reached into the pocket of her tiny coat and pulled out a folded $5 bill. "Here, you can have this. My mommy used to say, kindness costs nothing, but it's worth everything." David's heart lurched. He stepped closer now, seeing his daughter's bright, earnest eyes, the way she held out her last bit of money without hesitation. He knew that $5 wasn't just pocket change for them. It was the money Lily had saved all month to buy a book she'd been dreaming about. Yet here she was, offering it to a stranger, expecting nothing in return. Rachel blinked, stunned. She took the bill gently, as if it were the most precious gift she had ever been given. Her voice caught in her throat. I don't know what to say," she whispered. "Thank you. My name is Rachel." "Lily," the little girl said proudly, tugging David's hand slightly to introduce him. "This is my daddy, David." David nodded, managing a small, hesitant smile. "Hello, I'm glad you're okay. Lily doesn't usually give away her money so easily." He glanced at her, then back at the woman. You seem like you could use a friend right now." Rachel laughed softly through tears, a sound that was more relief than humor. I think I could. Really, thank you. You don't know what this means to me." Lily, unbothered by the woman's sobs, bounced on her heels. "Do you like dinosaurs? I know all the names." She started rattling off facts. Triceratops had 3 horns, Stegosaurus had plates on its back, velociraptors were faster than you'd think. Rachel listened, mesmerized, smiling genuinely for the first time that day. She let herself be drawn into the tiny whirlwind of energy and curiosity that was Lily. David hesitated at the edge of the bench, watching the two of them. He was tired, bone-deep tired from working 2 jobs, from nights alone in their small apartment, from the constant hum of worry about bills and Lily's health. And yet in this moment, watching his daughter share her innocence with a stranger, a warmth he hadn't felt in months or years creeped into his chest. The announcement of an approaching train pulled Rachel's attention away. "I think that's my train." She stood quickly, gathering her things at a rush just as the doors closed, distracted by the sudden reminder of her responsibilities waiting for her outside this fleeting pocket of calm. She stepped onto the platform, waving goodbye. "It was wonderful meeting you both," she said, her voice catching again. David smiled, but he noticed her bag left behind on the seat. "Wait," he called, standing, but the doors had already begun to close. Rachel was gone. Lily's eyes widened. "She forgot her bag, Daddy." David grabbed the bag, noticing the weight of it. "Don't worry, Lily. We'll get it back to her," he said, not yet realizing just how this small encounter was about to ripple through all their lives. That night, the apartment was quiet, except for the soft hum of the refrigerator and the occasional creak of the radiator. David sat at the small kitchen table, Lily asleep on the couch with a blanket pulled tight around her. The bag sat before him like a silent question, heavy with someone else's life. He hesitated for a moment, then unzipped it. Inside, he found a wallet, a notebook, and, most importantly, a small ID card with a phone number scribbled on the back. He stared at it, thumb brushing the plastic surface. The world outside felt far away. All the rushing crowds, the honking taxis, the endless obligations melted into the dim glow of his kitchen light. David Mercer was no stranger to struggle. Since his wife Sarah had passed 2 years ago, life had been a series of impossible choices. He worked 60 hours a week between a warehouse job and a late-night cleaning gig, and still the stack of medical bills on the counter grew faster than he could pay. Sarah's illness had been sudden, aggressive, a storm that left behind nothing but debt and grief. And now Lily, his bright, fearless little girl, needed surgery for fluid in her ears, a delicate procedure that would cost $12,000, money he didn't have. He leaned back in his chair, staring at the ceiling. How do you even start fixing something like this? He muttered to himself. His fingers brushed the ID again. Maybe she can help. But who was she? He remembered her face on the train, the way her laugh had come slowly, as if she hadn't really let herself feel joy in years. She had cried on a bench in Union Station, her vulnerability exposed in front of strangers, and yet she had smiled at Lily's chatter, leaned in, let herself be human. Something about her was so impossibly real. Rachel Foster, that was the name on the ID. David didn't know who she really was, not yet, but the name sounded familiar in a way he couldn't place, like the echo of someone who had been part of a life he'd only glimpsed in passing, a stranger with a presence that lingered. Meanwhile, in a high-rise office miles away, Rachel sat alone in a sleek, glass-walled apartment above the city, her hands wrapped around a cold mug of tea. She had been crying earlier, not for lack of money or material comfort, she had more wealth than she could spend in a lifetime, but because she felt invisible. Her parents had abandoned her after she stopped giving them money. Every friendship had been transactional, every relationship an investment with expectations. No one had ever just wanted her to be herself. The tiny kindness of a 5-year-old girl had pierced through the armor she had built around her life. She could still see Lily's small hand holding out that $5 bill, hear the clear, simple words about kindness. And in that moment, Rachel had felt seen. Not as a CEO, not as a bank account, not as a problem to solve, but as a person who mattered. Back in the apartment, David ran his fingers over the number again. He thought of Lily, sleeping soundly on the couch, her chest rising and falling with quiet dreams of dinosaurs and adventures he could barely afford. He thought of the surgery, of the impossible sums, and of Rachel, this mysterious woman who had shown him and his daughter a kindness that felt impossibly rare. 2 lives, so different, yet so lonely. One trapped by financial hardship, scraping and sweating for every necessity, terrified of failing his daughter. The other trapped by wealth, surrounded by people but utterly isolated, aching for a genuine connection. Their worlds had collided in that brief encounter at Union Station, a collision neither of them could have predicted. And now the question hung between them like a fragile thread. What happens next? David picked up his phone and stared at the blank screen, his thumb hovering over the dial pad. The bag sat heavy on the table, a tangible link between their separate struggles. He finally pressed the first number, then hesitated, caught between fear and hope, before dialing the rest. Somewhere miles away, Rachel's phone buzzed. She glanced at it, saw the unfamiliar number, and froze. Her heart beat faster, the familiar tightening of anxiety taking hold. Yet part of her wanted to answer. The next afternoon, the bell above the door of the daily grind jingled as David pushed it open, Lily tugging at his sleeve, her small hand clutching his. The cafe smelled of coffee and baked bread, a comforting warmth against the chilly March wind outside. He scanned the room, spotting a woman sitting near the window, fingers wrapped around a mug, staring out at the street as though trying to make sense of the world. "That's her," Lily whispered, bouncing slightly on her toes. David approached cautiously, holding Lily close. "Rachel?" he asked gently. The woman looked up, startled for a moment, then recognition softened her features. "David, Lily," she said, voice light, yet carrying a tremor of something unspoken. She gestured to the empty chair across from her. "Please, sit." Lily practically skipped over, plopping herself down with the energy of someone who believed the world was full of wonder. "Do you like dinosaurs?" she asked immediately, unwrapping a small, lumpy package from her coat. She pressed it into Rachel's hands. Rachel blinked at it. "What's this?" "It's for you," said Lily. "I made it. It's a bead. I put all my luck in it so you can have a good day." Her small smile was radiant, unself-conscious. Rachel held the bead, turning it in her fingers, a lump forming in her throat. I love it," she said softly. "Thank you." She looked up at David, eyes glistening. "Really, thank you both." David pulled out a chair, settling across from her. "I guess we should start with coffee, huh?" he said with a wry smile. "You look like you need it more than I do." Rachel laughed, the sound tentative but genuine, like she was testing the air around her for trust. "Coffee sounds perfect," she agreed. For the next hour, words flowed more easily than either expected. Lily prattled on about dinosaurs, her little voice punctuated with wide-eyed facts and questions, and Rachel laughed, leaning in to listen, asking questions in return. David watched her, noticing the way she softened around Lily, how her shoulders relaxed, how her laugh reached her eyes. Then, when Lily got up to refill her water, the conversation shifted. David's voice dropped, quieter now, weighted with unspoken grief. I miss her, you know," he said, glancing down at his hands. "Sarah, my wife. She died 2 years ago, and some days it feels like I'm just holding on for Lily." Rachel nodded, understanding more than she could explain. She took a slow breath, fingers brushing the bead Lily had given her. "I get that," she said. My parents abandoned me years ago. I guess I lost a lot of people along the way, and even when I'm surrounded by people, I feel invisible, like no one is really seeing me. They see the money, the title, but not me." David leaned back, studying her quietly. There was honesty there, raw and real, and it mirrored something he knew well, the ache of being alone in the middle of everything. "I can see you," he said softly. "Not the money, not the title. You." For the first time in a long while, Rachel felt something fragile stir inside her, a sense of being understood, not used. And when Lily returned, bouncing with her water cup, she handed Rachel another note, a simple drawing of a sun and a heart. "Just for you," Lily said. Rachel held it to her chest, tears threatening, and whispered, "You're a miracle, you know that?" That night, Rachel made a quiet decision. She wanted to help Lily, to ease the burden David carried without a single word of expectation in return. She contacted a shell foundation, arranging the full surgery anonymously. In the envelope she left at the hospital, she slipped a small note for Lily. "Use your $5 for the book you wanted. You earned it." Even as she did it, Rachel refused to reveal who she really was. She feared David would see her differently, would measure her worth by her wealth, not by the person who had cried on a bench and accepted a little girl's gift without hesitation. Back at their apartment, David tucked Lily into bed. She clutched her stuffed dinosaur, murmuring about her day, about Rachel, about the bead she'd given her new friend. He kissed her forehead, a bittersweet ache in his chest. "Daddy?" whispered Lily. "Yes, sweetheart?" "Do you think people like Rachel ever get lonely?" David hesitated, glancing at the phone on the nightstand, the number he still hadn't called. "Sometimes," he admitted. "Even people who have everything in the world can feel lonely. But," he brushed a lock of hair from her face, "sometimes they find people who see them, really see them, and maybe that's enough to make it better." Lily smiled sleepily, hugging her pillow. "I hope she's not lonely anymore." David stayed by her side for a long moment, watching her drift into sleep, thinking of Rachel and the strange, fragile thread that now connected their lives. One act of kindness had shifted everything. He just didn't yet know how much. A few weeks later, David sat in the hospital waiting room, watching as Lily emerged from surgery, her small face flushed but smiling. The surgeon patted his shoulder lightly. "She did beautifully, no complications, full recovery." Relief hit David like a wave, and he exhaled deeply, letting himself feel it fully for the first time in months. Lily reached for his hand, her tiny fingers curling around his, and he squeezed back, eyes misting. He stared at his phone again, tracing the screen with his thumb. The number was still there, the contact still named Rachel. He wondered if she had meant to vanish, or if fear had driven her away. He remembered the bead she had treasured, the way her eyes had softened when Lily pressed it into her hands, and a quiet ache settled in his chest. Weeks passed, the winter days stretching long and gray. And then, one crisp afternoon, David and Lily walked into the daily grind for their usual hot chocolate. The place was nearly empty, the smell of fresh pastries mingling with the rich aroma of coffee. Lily ran ahead, eyes scanning the room, then froze mid-step. "There!" she shouted, pointing. Rachel sat in her usual corner, her hands wrapped around a steaming mug, looking out the window with that same pensive expression David remembered from their first cafe meeting. She looked up, startled, then recognition softened her features. "Rachel!" Lily called, running forward without hesitation. She threw her small arms around her in a tight hug. David approached more cautiously, heart hammering. "Rachel, we've been trying to reach you. You disappeared after Lily's surgery. Why?" Rachel's eyes welled again, and she swallowed hard, setting down her mug. I was scared," she admitted, voice trembling. "Scared that if you knew who I really was, you'd treat me differently. That you'd see me as money instead of the person you met that day." David's brow furrowed, tension coiling in his chest. "You thought I'd, treat you like a check? Rachel, I don't care about your money. I care about the woman who cried on a bench, who listened to my daughter, who accepted her gift." She shook her head, tears spilling over now. "It's not just money, it's everything. I'm Rachel Foster, Apex Innovations, billionaire. People always want something from me. Love, friendship, loyalty, they're never for me, they're for the wealth I carry." David took a deep breath, feeling both astonishment and clarity. "I don't care about any of that," he said firmly. "You could have 10 lifetimes of money and it wouldn't matter to me. I care about you, the person who sat on that bench and let my little girl share her kindness with you. That's the person I care about." Rachel stared at him, disbelief and relief warring across her face. She searched his eyes for signs of judgment, but there was none. Only sincerity, only acceptance. Lily tugged at David's sleeve. "See, Daddy, I told you she was nice," she said, her voice full of triumph and joy. Rachel laughed softly through tears, covering her face with her hands for a moment. When she looked back up, the tension in her shoulders had eased, the fear that had held her captive for weeks dissolving just a little. I don't know what to say," she whispered. "You don't have to say anything," David replied, reaching across the small table. His hand hovered near hers, an unspoken offer of trust. "Just be here. That's enough." Rachel nodded, a tentative smile forming, fragile but real. For the first time in years, she felt seen for who she was, not what she had. And in that simple act, being accepted without expectation, she felt something she hadn't felt in a long time: hope. After that day at the daily grind, life began to settle into a strange, new rhythm for David, Lily, and Rachel. It wasn't instant, the kind of happily ever after that stories promised. There were awkward silences over coffee, small misunderstandings, and moments when pride threatened to push them apart before they could truly connect. But slowly, day by day, they found a way to fit into each other's lives. David learned to call Rachel without hesitation, though his fingers sometimes trembled over the phone. He had been conditioned to believe that accepting help meant losing independence, that being offered kindness was a trap or a debt he could never repay. But Rachel never demanded anything. She never reminded him of the surgery she had arranged or the quiet ways she had lightened their burden. Instead, she offered support in the smallest, most human ways. Picking up Lily from school when he worked late, sending a note tucked into Lily's lunchbox, or simply showing up with coffee on a morning when he hadn't slept, his eyes ringed and weary. At first, David refused her help. "I can handle it," he'd say, shaking his head, stubborn as ever. But Rachel learned patience. She'd smile, leave a little gift or note anyway, and wait. And slowly David began to accept her gestures, not as charity, but as care. He began to trust that someone could care for him without expectation, and that trust opened something in him he hadn't realized was closed: his heart. Rachel, on the other hand, was learning her own lessons. Every interaction was a gamble for her, a quiet negotiation with her own fears. She had spent decades believing that every friendship, every connection carried strings, a favor owed, a debt of loyalty, a requirement she could never fulfill. But David and Lily treated her differently. Lily laughed at her jokes, tugged her into play, and reminded her that sometimes a simple gesture, a bead, a smile, a hug, could mean more than anything in a bank account. And David looked at her as if nothing else mattered but the person she was at that moment. No judgment, no calculations, no expectations. Rachel had almost forgotten that feeling existed, and rediscovering it was at once terrifying and intoxicating. Over the months, they fell into a pattern of domestic chaos that felt perfectly theirs. Saturday mornings often found them at the local farmer's market, Lily dragging them from booth to booth, buying fruits she never touched, insisting Rachel try a new type of honey or coffee. David watched Rachel's face light up with genuine curiosity, laughing when Lily made her sniff a particularly pungent cheese. Rachel would tease David about his inability to bargain at the produce stand, and he would pretend to be offended, though inside he couldn't help but smiling at her ease, at the way she belonged to them without pretense. Evenings were quiet, usually at their small apartment, where the clutter of their lives, books, papers, Lily's toys, spilled into the corners, creating a home. Rachel would sit on the floor helping Lily with puzzles or reading aloud from dinosaur encyclopedias, while David prepared dinner. They argued occasionally about mundane things like whose turn it was to do laundry or whether Lily could have another cookie. But those arguments were small, human, and never lingered. They weren't fighting against each other. They were learning to exist in the same space, navigating differences with humor and patience. Rachel made gradual changes too. She began to step back from the relentless demands of her CEO role at Apex Innovations, delegating responsibilities to trusted executives. She wanted space, not just for David and Lily, but for herself, to experience life outside of meetings, spreadsheets, and endless strategic plans. She took walks with Lily in the park, taught her to ride a bike without training wheels, and learned to fold paper cranes with a patience she hadn't known she had. David often caught her watching Lily with a quiet intensity, realizing Rachel was experiencing the simple joys of a family she never thought she'd have. Meanwhile, David found stability in ways he hadn't before too. With Rachel's encouragement, not her money, just her support, he applied for a position at a local medical supply company, a job that finally gave him steady hours, decent pay, and the chance to feel competent again. He refused her offer to cover bills or pay rent outright, insisting on keeping his pride intact, but he leaned on her in small ways: advice on negotiating the lease for their apartment, guidance on a financial form he didn't understand. Rachel learned to give without fear, and David learned to accept without shame. Their relationship deepened slowly, built on trust, laughter, and the tiny, ordinary moments that carried extraordinary weight. They learned each other's rhythms, the way Rachel would hum while cooking, the way David tapped his fingers when he was nervous, the way Lily tucked herself between them when she wanted comfort. They became a family not by circumstance, but by choice. One chilly March afternoon, almost exactly a year after that first meeting at Union Station, David brought Rachel and Lily back to the station. He led them through the familiar concourse, past the Russian commuters, past the bright clocks, and finally to the same bench where Lily had given her last $5 to a crying stranger. The memory made Rachel's chest tighten, a mix of nostalgia and warmth she hadn't expected. David knelt by the bench, fumbling with something in his pocket. Lily's eyes widened, and she ducked behind a nearby pillar, giggling silently. Rachel leaned forward, curiosity piqued. David took a deep breath. "Rachel, this bench," he said quietly, "this is where it all started, where a little girl taught me, and maybe you too, that kindness can change everything, and it changed my life. It changed mine and hers and yours." He pulled out a small velvet box and opened it, revealing a ring that glittered softly under the station lights. Rachel's breath caught. "David, I want to keep building a life with you," he said, voice steady, eyes unwavering. "Not because you're rich, not because of anything you own, but because of who you are, the person who cried on a bench and let my daughter share her heart with you. Will you marry me?" Rachel's eyes welled up, her breath catching. She looked at David, then at the pillar where a tiny shadow peeked out, one hand clamped over a small mouth. "Yes," she whispered, voice trembling but firm. "Yes, of course." Lily exploded from behind the pillar. "She said yes!" she shrieked as they bonded at each other, the crowded station fading around them. David slipped the ring onto her finger, and for a moment the world outside, the noise, the rush, the chaos, faded. All that mattered was here, the little girl who had started it all, the woman who had opened her heart despite fear, and the man who had held steady through grief, pride, and struggle. They had found each other, and finally, for the first time in years, they belonged. 5 years had passed since that chilly afternoon at Union Station, and the Mercer Foster household was alive in the way only a family could be, messy, loud, and impossibly warm. The front door swung open constantly with the comings and goings of school friends, neighborhood kids, and delivery people who had learned early that packages often came with a chorus of "Thank you" shouted from the living room. Lily, now 10, bounded through the kitchen in a swirl of energy, backpack slung over one shoulder, sneakers scuffing the wooden floor. Her hearing was perfect now, every note of the morning bird song and every giggle of her younger brother clear as a bell. She carried a clipboard, scribbled notes, and a small stack of flyers. "Mom, Dad, the Kindness Club raised $400 this week for the families at school," she announced proudly, waving a crumpled list. David smiled from the stove, stirring pancakes and flipping one with a practiced flick. "That's incredible, Pumpkin," he said, watching her animated gestures. "I'm proud of you." Rachel, sitting at the kitchen table with Benjamin perched on her lap, smiled softly. Her fingers brushed the small, lumpy crocheted bead that hung from a chain around her neck, still a constant reminder of that first day when a little girl's simple act of kindness had changed everything. Benjamin babbled happily, waving a toy dinosaur in the air, his tiny eyes sparkling. "And Waffles," Lily added, looking toward the doorway where their rescue dog, a shaggy mix of brown and white fur, wagged his tail, ears perked in attention. Waffles had a habit of chasing his own shadow and stealing socks, yet somehow he fit perfectly into the chaotic rhythm of the household. Rachel leaned down to kiss Benjamin's soft cheek. "Looks like you two are ready for another adventure today," she said with a laugh, brushing a strand of hair from her forehead. David reached over, ruffling Lily's hair as she scribbled new plans for the Kindness Club. It had been years of small victories and quiet growth. David had secured a stable job at the medical supply company, finally able to breathe without the constant suffocation of financial stress. Rachel had stepped back from her CEO role at Apex Innovations, trusting her team to handle the company, freeing herself to invest in a life that was richer in connection than any balance sheet could reflect. Lily's Kindness Club had grown from a small idea into a school-wide initiative, inspiring other students and raising funds for families struggling just like hers once had been. She took her role seriously, organizing bake sales, toy drives, and tutoring sessions, all while keeping her boundless enthusiasm intact. She was proud, confident, and full of the same generosity that had once brought Rachel into their lives. That evening, the family gathered in the living room. Benjamin clambered onto Rachel's lap, Waffles flopped beside David, and Lily sprawled across the rug, proudly showing Rachel a drawing of dinosaurs hosting a kindness parade. Rachel held Lily's hand, fingers brushing over the tiny bead, the symbol of a moment when a small, selfless act had changed the trajectory of all their lives. David leaned back against the sofa, watching them, Rachel, Lily, Benjamin, Waffles, and felt a fullness he hadn't imagined possible years ago. The struggles, the grief, the fear, all of it had led them here. Not to perfection, not to silence, not to stillness, but to life, messy, vibrant, chaotic, and real. Rachel looked at David, her smile soft but radiant. He reached for her hand, entwining their fingers, the bead brushing gently against his palm. "We built this," he said quietly, voice heavy with gratitude. "All of it." "We did," she agreed, eyes glimmering. "All of it, together." And in that moment, the world outside, the noise, the rush, the weight of what had been, faded away. There was only this, a home full of laughter, love, and the tiny, powerful proof that one act of kindness, given freely and without expectation, could ripple across lives and change them forever. Lily leaned her head against Rachel's shoulder. Benjamin yawned in her lap. Waffles let out a contented groan, and David rested his hand on Rachel's back, feeling the steady heartbeat of the family they had become. 5 years later, the little girl who had given away her last $5 had grown into a force of compassion, and the woman who had once cried alone on a bench had found a family worth more than anything in the world. And through it all, the lumpy crocheted bead hung against Rachel's chest, a simple, unassuming symbol of the day a child's kindness changed 3 lives forever. And sometimes, when the house is finally quiet and the lights are low, Rachel still touches that little crocheted bead and remembers the day a 5-year-old girl offered her last $5 to a stranger on a bench at Union Terminal. Because that's the thing about kindness, you never really know where it's going to lead. If this story touched your heart, stay with us. Subscribe to Soul Strength Stories for more journeys filled with love, resilience, and the quiet moments that change everything.